Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, welcome to our video. So in this video we are going to explain about the structuralism theory. So let's start from the definition first. First of all, let me introduce my name. My name is Ilmi Alvan Evia with ID number 19320039. So let's start from the definition. Definition of structuralism. In linguistics, one of several schools of 20th century linguistics commit to the structuralist principle that a language is a self-contained relational structure, the elements of which derive their existence and their value from their distribution and opposition in text or discourse. Structuralism is a science that seeks to understand how a system works. It accepts the belief that things cannot be understood individually. Structuralists are not so much interested in the operation or aesthetics or meaning of a single entity as they are in trying to describe the underlying and not necessarily visible principle by which it exists. Then the definition from some figures such as John Piaget. Structuralism contains three main things. First, the idea of wholeness, in the sense that its parts or elements conform to a set of intrinsic rules that determine both the whole structure and its parts. And the second, the idea of transformation. The idea of transformation. The structure is capable of a continuous transformation process that allows the formation of new materials. And the third thing, the idea of self-regulation, which does not require things outside of itself to maintain its transformation procedure. The structure is autonomous from other system reference. And then according to House, structuralism is a way of thinking about the world associated with the perception and description of structure, or a structure whose elements or parts are interconnected between one part and the other. An element in a literary text does not have its own meaning if it is separated from other elements. It is an entirety. And then according to Ferdinand de Saussure, structuralism is a philosophical thought movement which has the main idea that all societies and cultures have a common and permanent structure. And then about historic structuralism in Europe. Historic structuralism in Europe developed in the early 19th in the field of structural linguistics from Ferdinand de Saussure next to Prague, yes, the Moscow School and Copenhagen linguistics. In the late 1950s and early 19th, when structural linguistics faced serious challenges from the likes of Noam Chomsky and this faded in importance. An array of scholars in the humanities borrowed Saussure's concept for use in their respective fields of study. The French anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss is said to be the first scientist sparking widespread interest in structuralism.
Ferdinand de Saussure, Language and Peril. Although Lange emphasizes the social aspect of language and an understanding of the overall language system, Saussure calls an individual's actual speech at risk peril. There is linguistic features such as loudness or softness that are overlaid on language structure. Its language. For example, two speakers can utter the same sentence such as I see a rat, One speaker shouts the word while another whispers them. Both outrage or example or peril and how individuals personalize language. Speakers can generate countless examples of individual outrage, peril. But this will all be governed by the language system, its language. It is the task of the language sourcer believes to infer a language's language from the analysis of many instances of people. In other words, for Saussure, the proper study of linguistics is the system language, not the individual utterance of its speakers. Peril.
Assumption structuralism. Such a belief presupposes that the structure of literature is similar to the structure of language. Like language, say the structuralist, literature is a self-enclosed system of rules that is composed of language. Literature, like language, need no outside reference except its own rule-covered, but socially constrained system. Before structuralism, literary theorists discussed the literary convention, that is, the various genres or types of literature, such as the novel, the short story, or poetry. Each genre, it was believed, had its own convention or acknowledged an acceptable way of reflecting and interpreting life. For example, in poetry, a poet could write in non-sentence using symbol and other form of figurative language to state a theme or to make a point.
Okay, next to the part of methodologies structuralism. Like the other theories, structuralism also has various methodologies. So let's take a look at Levi-Strauss' structural study of myth, mythological approach of the French anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss, who wanted to discover the language of the myth and its overall structure that allows individual examples to function and have meaning. In his mythology, there is a shift of emphasis from myth as a sort of plot, myth as a sort of thinking. When applied to a specific literary work, the intertextuality becomes evident. So, myths are simply another way we classify and organize our world. Next is Todorov grammar of narrative. Narratologists illustrate how the meaning of a story develops from its overall structure rather than from the isolated themes of individual stories. Todorov declares that all stories are composed of grammatical units. By applying a rather intricate grammatical model to narrative, diving the next into semantic, syntactic, and verbal aspects. Todorov believes he can discover the narrative's language and establish a grammar of narrative. And the last is Barthes' structural analysis of narrative. In an introduction to the structural analysis of narrative, Bader has discussed the structure of narrative. Narrative is a pure system and a discourse is a large sentence. In the same way that a sentence allowing for certain specifications is a small discourse. There's nothing in the latter that is not matched in the former. He analyzes the structure of discourse in three levels of functions, actions, and narration. In a structural study of function, the first step is to break it into smallest meaningful segments, which he calls function. Thus, a narrative function is a content unit.
On the level of action, he examined mainly the narrative agents. In Aristotelian politics, the notion of character is secondary, entirely subordinated to the notion of plot. And on the level of narration, there is a giver of narrative, that is a narrator, and there is a recipient of narrative, that is listener.
Literary theory application. A. Definition. A science that seeks to understand how systems work. It accepts the belief that things cannot be understood individually. B. Key concept. The first is meaning occurs to difference. The two is relation among sense are of two sorts. The third is structuralism, notes that much of our imaginative world is structure of and structured by. The fourth is structuralism forms the basis for semiotic, the study of science. The fifth is central to semiotic is the idea of codes. The sixth is some signs carry with them large cultural meaning, usually very general. The seventh is structuralism introduces the idea of the subject. The eighth is the conception of the construct subject open up the borders between the conscious and the unconscious. The ninth is in the view of structuralism, our knowledge of reality is not only code but also conventional. The tenth is there is then in structuralism. C. Applying structuralism. Starting with determining, the second is analyzing what elements, and the third is conducted in the form of analysis of some of these elements that can form a single unit of a story. Typical research question is the how the setting, what is the intrinsic, what are the extrinsic, how do the characterization, what point of view, the six what moral value, and the nine is how can a theme element in a story affect other elements. Were consulted by Piaget structuralism, how constraints structuralism and semiotic, Anabi theory into practice, Abrams glossary of literary terms, 10 edition, Gregory Castell, the literary handbook, Willie Blackwell, and the last is Blazer Carlos literary criticism.
So let's move to the literary review. So in this review, we take the example of an article entitled An Analysis of the Intrinsic Element and Moral Values in Tetsuko Kurenagi's novel Tutu-chan, The Little Girl at the Window, written by Ardayati and Ensih Rahayu. In its analysis, this article discusses the analysis of the intrinsic element and then also discusses the moral message contained in the novel. By using the theory or method of structuralism, researcher can analyze the existing structure in the story, namely how the structure or intrinsic element in the story are and how these elements become a structured unit that can build a story. By analyzing using structuralism as well, researcher also easily determine what the moral message in the story is. From the introduction, intrinsic elements are the elements which develop the literary work from inside, such as theme, character, characterization, plot, setting, and etc. Then formal value is not only learned in the class but also through read novel. Thus, the author of novel must use simple words so the reader will be easy for to comprehend what the contents of the novel. The analysis uses structural theory to make it easier to analyze intrinsic structure of the novel. The study examines what were the intrinsic elements found in the novel entitled Toto-chan, the little girl at the window, and then the second, what were the moral values found in the novel. In the finding and discussion, The researcher finds some interesting element like character, settings, point of view, theme. You can also see this in the PDF that I attach in the Google Drive. And then for moral values, there is maybe 2 or 3 moral values that I can touch in the novel. But the main point is that's about honesty, willingness, take the responsibility, moral independence, moral courage, humility, authentic values, realistic and critical. It is a moral value. I think there's a moral value in the novel to the Chan, the little girl at the window. So yeah, I think that's enough. Thank you for watching our video. I hope you understand about the material. So, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you.